Good evening, and welcome to episode 35. Episode 35. I can't believe it's been 35 episodes, but episode 35 of the Political Mic. I want to just extend my gratitude and appreciation for you for tuning in again. I want to have my guests join me shortly, but until they do, I just want to, just acknowledge the kind of week we had so far. A week that started with a week which saw the United States finally reach the Biden administration's goal of 100 vaccinations today. In addition to that, you also had a week in which racial animus and violence manifested itself in yet again another senseless gun shooting, which took the lives of innocent people in the Asian community. And you also have that as a direct result of the animosity that was stoked surrounding the conspiracies around COVID-19. Tonight, I'm very excited because I have a dynamic group across the country from diverse places who are each in their own right municipal leaders. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panelists I have, and shortly the other panelists will be joined momentarily. But I want to go ahead and introduce Professor Fred Cook, who's no guest to the Political Mic podcast at all. Professor Fred Cook was born and raised in the District of Columbia. He attended the District of Columbia Public Schools and graduated from McKinley Technical High School in 1965. After high school, Mr. Cook enrolled at Howard University and graduated in 1969 with a degree in psychology and a commission as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force. Professor Cook deferred some of his U.S. Air Force service and enrolled at the Howard University School of Law, where he was a managing editor of the Howard Law Journal and chairman of the National Conference of Law Reviews for the 1971 to 1972 school year. He graduated with honors from Howard Law School in 1972. Upon graduation, he served as the law clerk for the Honorable George W. Draper II, who was an associate judge for the Superior Court for the District of Columbia. In 1977, he returned to the District of Columbia and began a law practice after serving 4 years as a judge advocate general in the U.S. Air Force. And he began a law practice with a large corporate law firm specializing in telecommunications, higher education, entertainment, and corporate law. He became a partner in that law firm in 1982. In 1987, he was appointed by then Mayor of D.C., Marion Barry, to serve as the Corporation Counsel for the District of Columbia. He has been an adjunct faculty member of Howard University School of Law since 1992. He's one of the founding members of the Black Entertainment and Sports Lawyers Association, a member of the Washington Bar Association Hall of Fame, and a Washingtonian Magazine Top Lawyer awardee. He also serves on several boards of non-for-profit organizations, and he's a member of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Professor Cook, always a treat to have you. Thank you for joining again, sir, and making time. Next, I have a new guest, Miss Olivia Drapsick, who is a single mother, special education teacher, and first-time candidate living in Great Kills, Staten Island, New York. She is running for City Council in District 51. She has a background in mental health counseling and inclusive education, teaching and motherhood they're also on her resume, and she has a vision for New York City where those mean something. She enjoys reading, hiking, and traveling. Ms. Drapsick, thank you so much for being here. So honored to have you join. And the others, when they come, I'll briefly introduce them. But as for right now, I want to jump into the discussion. I know that time is of the essence. And so being that the Biden administration has had its first major legislative victory in the COVID-19 rescue package, also known as the American Recovery Act, which saw broad bipartisan support among the electorate. The polling indicated 70% of the American public overall had actually supported this bill. And in this bill, there were so many provisions to help stimulate the economy, to get vaccinations in more arms of American people, and to get schools to reopen again. I want to ask you, Ms. Drapsick, what does the American Recovery Plan mean specifically for your district?
Thanks for the question. And so I think, It's interesting because there's been a lot of open opportunity in terms of where that money can go. And so there's been a lot of discussion on a local level as to what the infrastructure needs to look like for that money to be used wisely. And so, funds open up all of the time, and it's important to get that relief. And so it needs to be up to local leaders and to the city officials that that money gets used appropriately. And so reopening schools, but not just reopening schools, reopening them safely. The infrastructure issues that led us to have unsafe buildings, are those going to be, a part of the plan? Will we be reopening to support with reducing class sizes and staffing and the concerns that led us here, right? And that made it unsustainable to stay open? Will we be supporting plans that alleviate those? And then, just in my own district, we really don't have the infrastructure set up for mass vaccinations. Many of my residents are, driving long times or going off the borough to get vaccination appointments. And so the availability of vaccinations might be there, but do we have the structures and systems set up to make sure folks can get appointments and that they can be close by? The homebound senior program and the vulnerable individuals. Do we have enough staff in the city to get to them in their homes? And so when we talk about funding, it looks really nice to have a big sticker item, but then on a local level, it really is up to officials and local leaders and building, coalitions with communities doing the work already to build the infrastructure to make sure that those funds are used wisely and effectively.
Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed, how you gave an on the ground perspective of what this means on in a tangible level. Because in the bill, you have money, you have funds that are going to be going towards hiring new janitors, getting better ventilation systems for schools, all with the goal of trying to bring back a sense of normalcy for the American people, specifically those who have children between the K through eighth grade. Professor Cook, and on the political side, because you'd also have some Republican senators who have not lifted a finger to get this bill passed, but also acknowledging that this bill does have great benefits in the long run. For instance, you have, was it Senator Wicker? I'm sorry, Senator Roger Wicker, who actually voted against the bill, but actually ended up supporting it after it was passed. Does this, or would this serve, because COVID-19 has been such a prolonged crisis, and we're still in the thick of things, even though vaccinations are on the rise, and things, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel? Would 2022 be impacted in any way, in your view, knowing that we are in a 24-hour news cycle, and what may stick today in terms of 24-hour news may not be the topic of conversation this time, November 2022? What say you, sir? Hold on, you're muted. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I muted myself. Thank you. Yeah, I think it has tremendous potential implications for 2022. The problem is we got to see how it rolls out. Are the local leaders, are the so-called national leaders going to be able to have this thing roll out in ways that benefit people in a direct and substantive way? Or are they going to have a lot of glitches, a lot of mistakes, a lot of missteps, and then be subject to criticism? It's interesting that the so-called Republicans have not really criticized the program because it is wildly popular across the country. What they've talked about is it's not targeted enough. It's a liberal wish list, as though that were a bad thing. In the world of elections have consequences, the people that won get to call the tune to some degree. And there is a much more than, I think, narrow reading of recovery. It's not literally replacing the dollars you spent to house people or to buy masks. It's also recovering from the structural deficits of the economy, of the inability of people to have places to live. So you can take a real narrow view of recovery, and that's a political talking point as opposed to a reality, or you can get about the business of helping people. And I think what's going to work, what has the potential to work for Democrats in 2022, is, does this program have results on the ground? Are people, as Ms. Drebzik said, are people really seeing the difference because their local leaders are allowed to use this money in ways, and in fact, prudently use this money to benefit constituents?
And that's an excellent point, because a lot of what we were seeing in the polling, and again, during that period between March 6th and 8th, you had, according to a CNN poll released during that time period, 61% of Americans overall supporting the relief package, 66% saying it would help the economy in some way. And in that same time period, say March 3rd to March 8th, there was a majority supporting most of the individual policies included in this package, including larger tax credits for families at 85%, funding for K through 12 schools at 77%, and $350 billion in aid to state and local governments. And a lot of, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, Republicans, their traditional position is we are the party that tries to put the brakes on too much spending. But during the Trump period, during the waning days of the Trump presidency, you actually had Trump himself sounding like a 1960s mayor saying, I want to be more generous than Nancy Pelosi. Right. Let's have $2,000 checks.
Yeah.
Is it possible to use that kind of position that Trump exited out on against the Republicans? And would it be effective? Or, in this era where spin has taken on a new meaning, would that not be something that you see as tangible or realistic?
Well, I think it has, a lot of potential upside. It has downside, but it has a lot of potential upside if the Democrats can make it clear that this is an administration that is about being responsive to the needs of the citizenry. And this is going to be difficult for the Republicans to get around because they really don't have a substantive or policy argument in rebuttal. What they're really doing is saying, well, we don't like this and you guys have gone too far. You spent too much money. Today, Mr. Powell at the Fed said that he thought the likelihood of any kind of significant inflation over the next year or two was small. Well, hopefully he's right. And if he is right and inflation doesn't turn into a runaway train, it's probably going to work out pretty well for the Democrats. If inflation goes through the roof or is a significant factor in the economy, that's going to work against the credibility of so-called Democratic leaders running for re-election, running for election in 2022. But, they've got this lawsuit that the Attorney General of Ohio has filed, trying to stop the $350 billion you mentioned in infrastructure payments, arguing that there is a constitutional infirmity to that particular provision of the law. It's an interesting argument or arguments because it's kind of got two or three prongs. There's a case that they're fundamentally relying on from 1987, South Dakota versus Dole, that they're using as the argument to point out that the allocation is either ambiguous or coercive and therefore unconstitutional. I think the argument about coercion is probably not going to work. The argument about ambiguity in the crazy legal technical world in which we live, it at least has a credible argument. Whether it wins in the court, different question.
And I was thinking about the parallels between this time period and 2010, because there seems to be a lot. The Republicans seem to be playing by the playbook of 2009 when the Obama administration held out for a little bit to try to get bipartisan support around the Affordable Care Act. But before that, to try to get bipartisan support around the government bailout of the, because we were in a financial crisis at that time. And so the Biden administration is learning from that, knowing that they got very little from, waiting that time period to get bipartisan support. And I think they're trying to take a different position and going on this tour, this help, right. Help has come, or tour, I believe it's called. But at the same time, when you're looking at the similarities between this time period of the early Biden days and the early Obama period, I'm wondering if, as it pertains to COVID relief, if this environment, would this environment provide, an ideal situation where, all of the provisions that may have been gutted from the Affordable Care Act during the Trump period, or maybe, can be restored, or maybe can you make the Affordable Care Act even stronger in this period where government intervention is more welcome than before? What say you? Let me just introduce Mr. Devin Keith, the city councilman. I'm so happy to have him. Such an honor to have you too, sir. City Councilman Devin Keith is also no guest to the political mic. He was sworn in as a member of the Huntsville City Council in Huntsville, Alabama, in November of 2016, setting a record as the youngest council member elected to Huntsville's legislative branch of government. In this role, Keith represents District 1, an area that covers much of northern Huntsville, including Alabama A&M University, and stretching into the downtown core. Mr. Keith is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Alabama A&M University and currently serves on the board of directors for the Cap and Gown Project, a Huntsville-based nonprofit seeking to provide opportunities for mentorship for underrepresented secondary school students who wish to pursue a college education. Mr. Keith believes that for a community to thrive, all its corners need to be tended to. As he often says, as North Huntsville goes, so goes Huntsville. This mentality has driven him to work with the city of Huntsville to launch the Neighborhood Resource Center, a program that brings city government to the neighborhood quite literally, helping to reduce crime and produce easy access to government resources. Keith is excited to give back to Huntsville, a city that, as he says, gave so much to him. Mr. Keith, such an honor to have you back. And again, we're talking about, what does the American Rescue Plan look like in terms of what kind of changes does it have for your respective communities? If you can shed some light on that, sir.
And I just want to say I'm going to concede in this moment. I apologize. I'm living in the past. When somebody says 7 o'clock, I just imagine the rest of the world is on the same time frame as me. So I thought I had a little bit of time, Mike, and I apologize. But to everybody else who's on the screen, I just want to say thank you for having me. I promise you I was going to be so prepared for this. But luckily, I was here just doing work, and I'm very thankful to be here. So I'll jump in where I can. And again, Mike, my hats, and I say this all the time to you, but I mean it. I'm so happy to know that I'm not just talking to the future, but I'm talking to the now. So anytime I get a chance to learn from you is an opportunity for me. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. And we're talking about, the question I raised a little bit earlier was, is this environment where some government intervention is welcome? I believe David Brooks of the New York Times wrote an op-ed last weekend in which he said that this is kind of like a reverse period of 1981, where instead of you having a seasoned conservative coming in with an ideology of government being the problem, you have a seasoned Democrat coming in with this idea where the government can actually be the solution to many problems, and it being welcomed by a majority of the American people. Is this environment ideal for a kind of improvement for the Affordable Care Act? Should the Democrats take advantage of this opportunity to try to strengthen the ACA or restore some of the provisions that were lost in the ACA during the Trump days? Anyone can jump in.
Okay, I'll do this. Yeah, I think they ought to seize on the moment. I think the ACA is very popular with people who get the benefit of the ACA. I think that the Democrats need to move forward with expanding, improving, fine-tuning the ACA to make sure that the benefits that it has the potential to provide actually are provided to people. And I think you see over the 10 years plus that the ACA has been in existence, it has moved from an item of disdain and marginal to something people genuinely feel is important in their lives and has made a difference in their lives. And as the cost of healthcare continue to go through the roof and the availability of healthcare go through the roof, and as we as a country collectively sort of figure out that this employer-based model for healthcare delivery is nonsense, and that people ought to have healthcare irrespective of where you work, I think it becomes easier and easier to sell and much more difficult for the Republicans to simply say this is some crazy liberal socialist damn near communist scheme that we have to fight tooth and nail. So I think the Democrats ought to move forward on it as much as they can. I mean, it's not only good government, it's good health policy.
Worse.
And City Councilman Keith, if you can touch on, what does the American Rescue Plan mean for North Huntsville, District 1? And would the folks in that area, because I know that, Northern Huntsville is one of the most progressive areas in Alabama, would any kind of improvement or strengthening of the ACA be welcomed in your district, in your view?
Yeah, and really actually to get to it, I love to really dive into this local politics. Hey to my other two heroes, Mr. Davis, Mr. McCall, how y'all doing? But local politics and the connection right now that we're actually seeing from federal politics, there is actually, for some foreseeable, unfortunate, and morbid reasons, a direct connection to federal policy, affecting local government. We'll just look at really the relief plan that's put out by HUD on what is about to happen here in the state of Alabama, which is affecting not only my district, but the districts around the state, is putting a moratorium on evictions. And that the stay on that has really, has called a dishevel point for a number of people who've put together rent restructuring. And this is multifaceted. Think about when this allocation came out from HUD on rent relief to most of the owners who are having some amount of stimulus support and inherently having some rent support. The relief funds were really flowing at a rate that were allowing people to make up on their rent. And that was back pay. Well, inherently, we have to ask ourselves, for the people who've lost jobs, there's some pay to come. And that a direct shut, as they've turned off the faucet, I guess you could say, that will potentially come in the next 3 months, and then saying that there was no stay by the governor, and there's no support at the federal level to stay anybody who has a potential eviction, is really that you're paying the back pay of what they owe, but they're still getting kicked out in 30 days. So collectively, I like to look at it through a local lens. There has actually been a shift of more governmental involvement, especially from those people who are in lower economic positions. Those are Republican and Democrat, by which I'm blessed to represent. Individuals are asking for more governmental intervention, as starch Republicans saying the government should do something to stop the fact that they should not be able to be kicked out of their home, especially if they are caught up on rent with governmental funding. So there's a level of political dissonance and policy dissonance that is happening at a national level, which I think the Democrats should just capitalize on. You are turning to the government to say, help me be healthy and help me have a home. I'm not calling it a socialist, but I'm just saying that structuring of impact has a value.
And I just want to briefly introduce Dr. Davis, who represented Indiana as an active member of the community, who also was running an election in his own right. But even though he fell short of the election, continues to remain an active and engaged member of South Bend, Indiana. And also Jaquez T. McCall, who is also a city councilman in Florence, South Carolina. Two very distinguished men. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to get your thoughts too on, what the American Rescue Plan means for your respective districts on the ground, being that the focus of this panel is supposed to be what does this plan mean on the ground locally? The old adage, all politics is local, comes to mind. And I'm wondering, what kind of policies particularly have significant meaning for the residents in your respective areas. Anyone can jump in.
Good evening. Thanks for having me here. Sorry about being a little late. I think for us here in South Bend, Indiana, we are glad to be getting monies that are going to go locally to help our health department in our county. Our health departments have been tremendously overtasked with all of the COVID work. And now it is the goal to really put some money into our health areas. That's going to be very interesting given the fact that three of our commissioners all three of them are Republicans, and they have a very interesting philosophy regarding those kind of roles. And in fact, the issue of wearing masks and other issues has not been as prominent among two of the three. One of them, I must give credit, has really been advocating for that, which I'm pleased. But the other two, no. So how does that all turn out to be in terms of their past behavior with lax issues, in terms of not really making it a big deal? Now that this funding is coming in, we need to really help take care of our local health department in so many different ways. So taking that politics that is local that Councilman Keith talked about and helping us now tie into that, because the money is coming here. And this is a red state, just like Alabama, but the only reason it has stayed red is because many of us have not jumped up the way we should have and made it a more purple to blue state. Again, it could be a light blue, whatever kind of blue. But the bottom line is it got to go blue. And on these issues of healthcare and issues of what we can see in our own homes is the time that we must capitalize on saying what is going on in Washington is definitely affecting us here in our local areas. And I think with this money coming at this time locally to our own homes and to our own local governments, it's really key for us to be excited about it and to brag about it. I'm glad President Biden is going around on this tour, because you have heard that many times in the past, President Obama didn't take that kind of a tour back in 2009. And not taking it to the street, not taking it to the local home, made everybody not really understand what his politics were. You got to take it to the street so people understand it here in our own city. So I'm very grateful for that tour.
Yeah, Mr. McCall.
Hey, again, can you all hear me well? Look good. Thank you. Again, apologize for the technical difficulties. Yeah, I was trying to hop on like 4 or 5 times. Kept getting knocked off, but nevertheless, I'm here. But again, to piggyback off of what Mr. Keith said, who's out there in Alabama, here in South Carolina, I think our biggest problem is going to be is rental assistance for our neighbors. Basically, we're going to have once the moratorium is up, there's going to be a slew of people who are lining up to get rental assistance, and I think this rescue plan it gives us extra funds to make sure that we're helping those people in that dire need. If I can tell you the amount of applicants that I've already seen of people contacting the city to help them pay for their back rent, man, it's ridiculous, man. And I think it's a crisis that I think that's next in line. Hopefully, the funds that's we're going to get through the rescue plan will be able to help us eradicate that to a certain extent. But I think it's a step in the right direction. But I think we're just reaching the crux of a major problem, primarily here in South Carolina. And in addition to that, too, I'm cognizant that our businesses are ready to rebound, and I think there would be money set aside for our small businesses to capitalize on, for us to kind of make a more well-rounded approach, a more rebound towards a better running and sustained economy here in Florence. But again, the rescue plan is definitely a step in the right direction. I'm just kind of perplexed that the first couple stimuluses that came out, Republicans were in all favor and all support of it. Now that there's a Democrat in the White House, now they're all opposed to it. So again, it's kind of you wonder, are they playing? They're playing politics with people's lives out here, man. So again, I'm glad that the plan was passed and everything is working out. Those stimulus checks are definitely out there, and I'm encouraging people as much as I can to spend those stimulus checks. They're made to spend. The point of a stimulus check is to stimulate the economy, not to save it, which I want you to save. I want you to invest. Yes, I do. But the purpose of the stimulus checks is to spend it to help reboost the economy so there won't be a downfall. So again, it can help our local businesses thrive as they did prior to this pandemic.
And before I move on from this topic, I want to ask, and anyone can jump in, please feel free. Would a victory lap, to Dr. Davis's point, and I think we were talking about it a little bit earlier, would that cause Republicans to actually get more animated? Would that cause them to huddle together and start to come up with a more calculated approach to not only dismantle or the right to vote or the access to the ballot box, but also get candidates and get their already elected leaders to form a narrative that, although there was a need for government intervention, this was not the right approach for, fiscal conservative reasons or whatever the case may be. What say you? Anyone?
I don't want to predominate this, and I see I got two guys here from who pronounced it Huntsville, but I call it Huntsville. So I'm sorry about that. But I think that, the mentality or the political position that fiscal conservatism rules the day is has a point of inelasticity. When people are hurting, when people can't pay their rent, when they don't have jobs, when they don't have health care, you can't sell fiscal responsibility to them very easily, because they want to know, well, what's in it for me? It's all fine and good to talk about everybody has to take care of themselves and support yourself and provide for yourself. But when the infrastructure is no longer there, when you can't go to work, when you can't go to work because your children can't go to school, when you can't get your kids educated because of the technical difficulties of at distance learning, when you have kids with special needs who can't get attended to because of distance learning, people don't want to hear fiscal responsibility is the rule of the day. People want the government to do something to be helpful to them. And Mr. Taylor and I have had this conversation before. Part of the challenge that people who call themselves Democrats or liberals or progressive is that for years and years and years, they have not really focused on how to get services to the people they profess to want to help. It's been too intellectualized. And I think, as Dr. Davis talked about, the victory lap, the meeting people where they are piece of this is very important, to connect with them, for them to see that you care about them, and for you to actually hear what they're saying so your policies can reflect what they want and need, not what you think they should have. And as we had this conversation before, you can't say to someone very effectively, I want to clean the environment. I want the environment to be good. That's why I'm going to close your coal mine, because it's bad for the environment. But you don't give me a job. Where am I going to take care of myself? How have I? Now, you can criticize me for being a filthy, dirty coal miner, but it put food on the table. It put a roof over my kids' heads. I like that. So if you're going to tell me that the environment has changed and the rules of the road have changed, and we can't do that anymore because it's bad for the environment writ large, then who's going to take care of me? How am I going to take care of myself? Give me something. So it's got to be something that works. And the Republicans or the fiscal conservatives, all they want to do is hold back progress. They don't have a policy themselves. What they want to do is stop you. They don't want to say this is better. All they want to say is what you're doing is bad. And I think that doesn't work long term. It works for a while, but it can't work long term.
I agree. And I also think it doesn't work now that we have the votes that we have, right? And the power that we have to actually make these things go on, even with the no's and even with those pushing back. So people are seeing action, and there's movement, and that has a real impact on their day-to-day life. And so the narrative of misinformation and saying, well, they're just trying to do this, or they're wasting a lot of money, it doesn't sell for very long when people see an immediate, people see change in their lives right away and in their quality of life, and have some relief. And just going to the point of the CARES Act that came up earlier, I think that this year we really grappled with, like, health is essential, and not just health, but collective health, right? It matters that my neighbor is sick, and that makes me sick. So I do think this is the time to seize on that, and what does safe staffing look like? And a lot of this affordable healthcare and options for affordable healthcare are really good for healthcare workers, right? And keep the healthcare systems going and working effectively. And that it has been, light has been shed on that this year as well. And so this absolutely is the time to talk about those options on a federal level.
I say that those on the federal level have to act like local politicians, and they have to bring it home. They got to continue to make their decisions, get back on that plane, come back home and talk about it, and come back home and have their teams talk about it in the stores, local communities, local libraries, come to the local churches, get on Zoom with the churches who are still, because my church is still on Zoom. And so, whatever you have to do, you have to get out there and make it connect. And that's the issue, is what we've been talking about, the discussions of my colleagues here. You have to make it connect, because again, you have to consider a couple of things. A lot of your local papers are not as strong as they used to be. And so therefore, you don't have the local news really picking up on those issues. So you have to take that national news and make it local. And if you can keep making it local and telling what we are doing, you have to be able to connect Washington with South Bend, Washington with Huntsville, whatever way we want to pronounce Huntsville. I was born in Huntsville Hospital myself, okay? And so I understand the different ways. I'm up here in the Midwest, so I may sound more like a Midwesterner, but I'm still roll tide, so I'm cool. All right, Bulldogs down there, and I'm all good. So the thing about it is, we have to bring it home. And that's you can tell somebody you love them all day long, but then you got to bring those flowers home. You got to bring that candy home. You got to have everything. If they want to smell the home good cooking, y'all can have it all on the screen, but I got to smell it when I walk in my house. Then I know that's greens with onions in it, with some peppers in it. Now I know what my money's being spent for. It's being spent for something I can smell, I can taste, I can cook, and I'm ready to sit down and eat it. Don't just keep it in DC.
I want to pivot to another topic that's been making headways in the past 24 hours, at least, or past 42 hours, I should say. 3 shootings that took place this past Tuesday evening at 3 separate spas around the Atlanta, Georgia area. The first in Ackworth, Georgia, north of Atlanta, and the others across the street from each other, also within the city. The shootings happened within 1 hour of each other. And Mr. Long, who was the perpetrator of this crime, has been charged with 8 counts of murder and 1 count of aggravated assault. And this is according to officials. He is being held in Cherokee County without bond, and he waived his right to an attorney. The suspect, Robert Aaron Long, told investigators that the shootings were not racially motivated, and instead blamed his addiction to sex, according to a statement from the Cherokee County Sheriff's Office. But this stimulated or took a conversation that was already taking place on the national level about hate crimes against the Asian American community, and really just gave it new life, because we're seeing that today there was a hearing. There was a hearing that took place on Capitol Hill, and in this hearing, prominent American lawmakers, scholars, and advocates, including actor and producer Daniel Day Kim, testified today on the rise in hate crimes and discrimination against Asian Americans before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. And so this this was supposed to be a repository for making concrete, tangible change towards improving the statistics of hate crimes that the Asian American community has experienced, especially in light of this COVID-19 pandemic. When you had the President of the United States calling the pandemic a China virus. Representative Chip Roy, a Republican of Texas, opened up today's hearing by saying, "We believe in justice. There's an old saying in Texas, find all the rope in Texas and get a tall oak tree." He said that we take justice very seriously and we ought to do that, round up the bad guys. That's where we believe, he says. I want to get your thoughts on this ongoing national discussion about hate crimes in the Asian American community. What should be done on the national level, and how much responsibility does the former administration have for this recent act of senseless violence? Don't be shy. Anyone just jump in as you
Well,
feel.
the former administration stirred the pot. They stirred the pot. They made it very hot for people who are Asian American by calling everything the China virus. And so when people were seeing their loved ones die, places being closed, home isolation being the way of life, the fact that we have to wear a mask in all these places, they started to blame all of those actions on people from not only China, but anybody who, because Korea, everybody, the whole Pacific section, because basically they say they all look alike, so we all gonna treat them alike. And that's the way the attitude was. And if you stir that same kind of negativity regarding any population, the hate that has been experienced by African Americans, or how the hate of this last administration toward those who come from our Hispanic populations, all of those kind of things start showing up. And this is just the culmination of all of that kind of situation. It is very appropriate and very nice that our vice president, who has Asian descent in her own background, was able to talk from that experience. And it's very great to be able to talk from a Black experience and also from an Asian experience. And I thought that that was words of comfort that she brought yesterday to help us heal from this situation. But it is here, it is real. And as a therapist in my life, for somebody to utilize their addiction to justify that they are going to kill somebody is ridiculous. There's a lot of people who have sexual addictions, but they're not out there shooting everybody every day. There are a lot of people who have other types of addictions, but they're not out there killing everybody. But that was a flip to try to make it a mental health issue. And if you make it a mental health issue, then now that goes to the insanity kind of thing. Get me off of that. And a key issue, and then I'll be quiet, is how that police officer who made the comment said, well, he was just having a bad day. A bad day? Now, I've had some bad days. Today, I was running behind and late because of school and everything else going on. So I know what a bad day, but nobody in South Bend got killed because of me today. You're not going to see me on the news because of that. A bad day is how the officer described this person. That was a shame. My mother would call that shabby. That was just downright shabby to say that he had a bad day and that's why 8 people were killed. Ridiculous.
And to your point, that officer, from what I believe, when they investigated his social media accounts, they saw that he had purchased T-shirts, derogatory T-shirts with the COVID-19 title on it, alluding that there was an imported virus from China.
And that's why he was playing that down. Goes back to your point. And so I can see how he was minimizing that.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Drepsick?
Yeah, I was going to say that, even bringing to light this addiction with, sex addiction, I think really almost gives light to the fact that this is, very racially charged, because the Asian community, specific Asian women, have been sexualized historically, right? And this is a fetishized population, right? And dressed up, and this is a group of people that historically are fetishized and sexualized. And so this anti-Asian hate that is on the rise, and to kind of downplay it with sexuality, and kind of minimalizing the fact that that is also an experience of the Asian community and of Asian women, shows that we just need more voices. And you spoke about what can we do? Elect more women, elect more Asian women. It's budget season in New York City. Fund more Asian American led, Pacific Islander led community coalitions and groups. Let people speak for themselves. Let folks say their own experience, so that we don't have officers or community leaders telling the news and they can't pronounce the names of victims. And that doesn't seem to be the issue, an issue that somebody says, hey, we should probably get this right for 8 families watching this right now. And so who's going to pull that and say, this isn't good enough? And it has to come from those communities. They have to be able to speak for themselves and speak to their own experiences, because even when we're downplaying it, those communities are saying, hey, you're talking about sex addiction. What I still hear is an experience that we know to be linked with our community. And if you would just let us speak for a minute, we'll tell you that. And so I think when we're moving forward, if we can't give condolences, we have to give space. That's what I think.
And to your point, Ms. Drepsick, that's an excellent point, both you and Dr. Davis, because in addition to that, ABC News did reveal tonight that there was a study that did suggest that former President Donald Trump's inflammatory rhetoric around the coronavirus had an effect and likely perpetuated racist attitudes. The Asian American community has experienced a striking rise in incidents. And so the former president's repeated use of the phrase China virus and other terms helped fuel an environment. And that's according to a study that was conducted since last year. And so, for folks who are saying, well, why are you making this about Trump? Why are you blaming him for everything? when you have a position like President of the United States, there are real tangible consequences. And what we're seeing is the result of people feeling legitimized to go out and act on the conspiracies and the rhetoric that was touted out by the person living in the White House. Because when you have someone on that level giving legitimacy to these kinds of conspiracies, it takes on a new meaning. And when we're looking at this area, this is Georgia, and when we're breaking down the demographics of these counties, the surrounding Atlanta area, that's typically a blue area. When you're looking at the map this past November, you saw the Metro Atlanta area blue, and then you saw a sea of red counties. And so when we're seeing, huge Republican support like this, and I just moved in this area, and I can attest to the amount of Trump signs and Trump support I still see in place right now after the election is long gone, and it's the middle of March. You do have a lot of people who look to Trump as someone who is not just, the president, but someone who is supposedly supposed to still lead the party in the future. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really disingenuous for Mr. Trump and his supporters to say, well, he can't make people do stuff. The only reason he uses that microphone is to influence people, and so it's really kind of silly to say, well, they only are influenced on the good stuff I say. They're not influenced on the bad stuff I say. It's just nonsense. This country has a long history of anti-Asian behavior. Back from when the Chinese came to the United States, were imported in huge numbers to build the railroads in the West. The Anti-Chinese Immigration Act of 1923. It is there. It is a racism that is just as virulent as anti-Black racism. Korematsu decision that Mr. Taylor knows about, the Supreme Court, when they interned all the Japanese during World War II for no reason other than the fact they look different at the end of the day. So this is there, and it doesn't mean that he has turned a majority of his 74 million voters into virulent anti-Asian racists, but all he's got to do is turn loose 5, 10, 20,000 of them. That's enough to create havoc across this country. And that's what he did. He fed into the historical racism of many Americans against Asian people. And this is the consequence of what we've got. And people have to stand up and say, this is wrong. Look, I mean, there's lots of Trump supporters who, I don't agree on anything, but they don't harbor any particular animus toward Asians. But they also don't harbor a desire, internalized desire to be advocates against it when they hear it from other people. And that's all it takes, as Dr. King said. All it takes is a few good men. It takes good men to be quiet for bad stuff to happen. And so that's what's going on. And Trump knew well what he was doing. It got him a lot of rah-rahs from his end of the political spectrum. But it's dangerous behavior. And people who are responsible need to speak out against it. And as Ms. Dribzik said, we need to give our members of the Asian Pacific Islander community the microphone to tell their own stories, to tell us how they feel. I don't profess to know, but they need to tell us what's going on from their perspective, and then we ought to behave accordingly.
And to your point, Professor, even up until CPAC this past, I think January, February, Trump still took to the stage, made his grand debut since the election, and repeated that phrase. So this is an ongoing thing. I want to ask about Congressman Clyburn's push for legislation that would allow increased, enhanced background checks on guns in light of this past shooting, in light of the other shootings that took place. I know that, the Charleston loophole was a part of legislation that was born out of the 2015 massacre that took place, killing 9 members of a church during a Bible study. In light of the fact that Democrats now have COVID relief in the rearview mirror and looking for the next legislative victory, I know that infrastructure has always been that mirage where, bipartisanship could be achieved because you had both Republican President Trump and Democrat President Biden and Obama saying that they want to get something done on infrastructure. But as it pertains to gun reform, is there, I know that we're getting into a harder territory now because now you need a 60 vote threshold to get significant legislation like this passed. Can we rely, or can we target specific senators in the middle, like Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins? Can you target folks like Mitt Romney to try to peel away some votes and get some kind of momentum or capitalize on the momentum that's already in place to get this this legislation that was proposed by Congressman Clyburn in the House into effect? I know that Senator Blumenthal has come up with the Senate version of Congressman Clyburn's House bill. What are your thoughts on this?
I guess I would, and we just had this conversation here locally. So you're again trying to pare this down to a local level of understanding it, and not trying to put my Democratic hat on. As many people know, and as McCall knows, I have to be as nonpartisan as I possibly can in my role, but in my person, without a doubt, a proud Democrat. We've actually seen this reform trickle down of this bipartisan reform to actually very specific roles. And I've tried to make this argument to a lot of the state legislators is that there was a number of provisions that were put in place after Sandy Hook, after Newtown. What was it to have gun reform if at one point in most of the schools here in rural and even most of the city schools, there were metal detectors, there were advanced technologies around pat downs, you had clear book bags. They were taking federal steps and local steps to be accountable for those individuals who potentially carry weapons. So being accountable and putting in infrastructure, it's always been about partisanship. The messaging has never overlapped, in my opinion, to be successful. To say you've always taken provisional steps to make people safe. You've made people safe so far that you've made school zones where places people can't have guns. And you've also made technology that is to detect such weaponry. And if that's the case, we're trying to do that, but in a more personal sense. You're trying to have that technology put through a background check, which is making those individuals, which again, you don't want to have the guns, not have that opportunity. And it, at the local and state level, trying to make people traverse and see that the bipartisanship is really a productivity of having, like we've talked about more in Alabama than anything, as they say, the right people with guns. The accountability is what I think is missing in the conversation. We have taken steps, again, to just double down that we don't want certain individuals in certain places and spaces to have weaponry. If that's the case, why does it not make sense to make sure those individuals have never had or even have a harder process to get those things?
And this bill that the House put forward is interesting. The timing is interesting because it's part of a large amount of legislation that Democrats are pushing before April 1st, which under the McGovern rule allows bills introduced before that date to skip the markup process if they pass the previous Congress. So in light of that, the fact that this would obviously be hitting the ground rolling before April 1st, would that momentum or that timing serve to the benefit of Democrats, or would there be no difference knowing that you're not going to get that 60 vote threshold in the Senate?
I think you still have to push. You push for today, recognizing that the victory may come in 2022. You push as much legislation out there, and you got to get it going now while you have this momentum, and continue to take the message back home. And then you make it a part of the 2022 election. That's where, if you've done your seeds back home and you planted it there, when you go back to the election, you can then reap from it at the election time, because oftentimes the president's party does not win right after the election, because they get to Washington, get their new places, get excited to be in DC, all the other things. They'll go to the State House, get excited to be there, and they forget about their old telephone number back home. If they have to continue to keep that number going on back home and then move forward. And that's where they have to be able to move forward from there, and then to remind themselves. And if they can continue to take that message back home, then the 2022 elections will have a stronger impact, and we will be seeing something different, where we not only can win in 2020, but we can win in 2022 and move into 2024. So you have to plan so many things out, but you have to plant them now. Sometimes you plant a seed and it's going to come up in 6 weeks. Others will come up in 6 months. Others may come up in 6 years, but you still plant it now.
right.
Ms.
Yeah, again, sorry for I'm just sorry about hopping in and out. But again, and I agree with Dr. Davis on that as well. It's the the Charleston loophole and all that. To be honest with you, I honestly totally believe that. I don't think those more moderate Republicans will cross over for that 60-point threshold, because at this point, I think it's all up to 2022 at this point, and I think they're not willing to buck. Well, some of them may be, but I know that most of them are not going to be ready to buck the party to that extent enough to make sure that they're heavily primaried in 2022. I'm willing to bet those who definitely voted for impeachment, and those in the House, and then those who are going to vote for to close this Charleston loophole will definitely be primaried heavily by the NRA and by Trump supporters in 2022. So again, and all of the stuff that's coming up before the April 1st deadline. Again, as a proud Democrat that I am, I understand too. I don't think there's enough votes on the other side. Although I'm in favor of getting rid of the filibuster, which apparently takes 60 votes to get rid of it. But I'm in favor of getting rid of the filibuster. But knowing where we're at today, I honestly believe that I think it's going to be tough for us to get those votes. And I think the leadership team in the Democratic Party knows that, and they're just making people aware that who's on the front lines fighting for them, and what we want to do if we had enough votes to get things passed. And just right now, the votes are not there, but you can still be an advocate for those out there. And I think definitely, I think that today they just came out with a version of an immigration reform for our dreamers. Again, there's no way the Senate is going to pass that, but I think letting those individuals know that we are here for them, we're here to fight for them, it'll go a long way in having them, come out continuing to support our ideals of the party, and to come out in 2022. So it's kind of more of trying to drive up the base more so than actually getting it passed. But hopefully in 2022, if we're able to garner more seats, which I think we have, the Republicans have more seats up for defense than we do. So we have a good chance of possibly pulling some more votes out. Hopefully we can get things like that passed in 2022 if we can keep the House in 2022 as well. So again, going back to everything I was saying again, but the main thing is I think this here is just to show a narrative of who we're fighting for and what we're going to continue to fight for moving forward.
Thank you. And the last, topic I want to talk about for tonight is New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. Earlier this week, President Biden sat down with George Stephanopoulos in an ABC 101 exclusive interview, and he said, the woman should be presumed to be telling the truth, but the investigation should also go forward. And if there are findings of wrongdoing, then he should step down. But at the same time, most New Yorkers seem to be satisfied with Governor Andrew Cuomo's explanation of the sexual harassment allegations made, according to a Siena College Research Institute poll released this past Monday. The governor's overall popularity has taken a hit over the past few months, but only 43% of New Yorkers now view him favorably, while 45% view him unfavorably. Cuomo's numbers had already been gradually declining, however, but at the same time, the majority believe that he should stay in office. I want to get your thoughts on to whether Cuomo should resign in light of the fact that Democrats seem to always take they abide by different standards than the other party, and that you had, for instance, Democrats unanimously getting Al Franken to resign back in 2017. Around the same time, you had Roy Moore, who was running for Senate, and you couldn't even get Republicans to actually condemn or say that he should drop out the race or anything like that. And then, in light of the fact that you also have Ralph Northam, who the Governor Cuomo and his aides may be looking at, and taking a hard look as to whether or not Cuomo should resign, because you had a lot of calls for Northam to resign in light of, I think, yearbook photos that came out with him wearing blackface. But after a while, that seemed to subside, and now he's enjoying high popularity, high polling numbers. Do you think that Cuomo should follow that Ralph Northam route of, just weathering the storm, getting through this, continuing to focus on COVID-19 in New York, and the response he had, before the revelation of the, nursing homes and underreporting and all of that, he was really on top of the world, it seemed, as a governor who was effective handling this crisis with both hands on the wheel. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, it's just it all works together, right? We're talking about a man shooting women in a massage parlor and then being told he's having a hard day. And we're talking about a governor who it's abuse after, abuse of power after abuse of power, and not just this year, but is able to sort of just deny and deny and deny and just wait it out. And, I think what's been really an unfortunate narrative is this idea of cancel culture and being able to use it against or for whatever you're deciding you want to manipulate folks to think about at that time, and saying, I'm just trying to be canceled. And again, it just really leads to this idea of whose story matters more, right? And just in general, if we're going to talk about white supremacy, we're talking about it here, right? The white male in office and his story, and being able to capitalize on the fact that when we were hurting most, and it kind of is a thread throughout this entire podcast, when New York City and the country were hurting most, Governor Cuomo was in our homes speaking to us calmly every day. And that really does something psychologically to folks about what's the effectiveness of leadership. And so he's able to sort of deny and deny. And because we've often downplayed sexual assault, sexual harassment, he's able to use this cancel culture to his favor, right? And say that I'm trying to be canceled. And unfortunately, 15,000 dead in nursing homes get swept under the rug, and a scandal around that, because of that psychological aspect that during the heat of all of this, Governor Cuomo is in our home speaking to us. And that really, really leads to the fact that we talked about earlier, but how effective it is to see your voters and your base where they are, and speak to them and talk to them and explain things out to them. It's really something he's running with right now, unfortunately.
Dr. Davis, go ahead.
I think this, when you are in our homes and bringing that kind of comfort that was just stated, it was comfort to a lot of people. It was comfort to a lot of Democrats. It was comfort to maybe even moderates, but it was not comfort to those on the right. It was not comfort to President Trump. And in fact, it forced President Trump to have to start doing his own press conferences, which even when he did, it started to attack his own numbers. And I think because of President Trump's press conferences, it led him to go into a tailspin that he never got out of. And with that tailspin that he never got out of, it affected the election. So therefore, if you're going to get into our homes every day like Governor Cuomo did, and you're going to basically cause the president of the United States to go into a tailspin like no other Democrat did. I mean, even at the time, Vice President Biden was not even as strong, because he was still Vice President Biden, and there was still a lot of shakiness there. He wasn't as strong as he is now. The Democrat who was the strong this time last year going in was Governor Cuomo. He was the strong one. And he led that tailspin that President Biden was able to pick up and lead. Now, when you do that, you have to make sure that your house is pretty much straight, and that the clothes have been picked up, everything else out there, because everybody and their cousin's going to come after you. So first of all, we heard about him hiding the numbers of the COVID numbers. That was the first thing that hit. And I knew that was going to probably be there, because that's where he really dug in hard last year. And the fact that he hadn't got his own house cleaned in that area sent him into an interesting situation. And then you have the battle going on with him and the mayor of New York, who do not like each other. And the mayor of New York would love to be the governor. And so anytime he has a chance to expose him, he jumps on him because they're battling. You have that issue. And then you have the issue of the whole sexual harassment issue that it's very difficult for any man in their right mind to even say anything about, because to say anything about it, you can get shot at and get completely destroyed. The thing that you have to do in there, I think two things, and I recognize that it takes a long time for many times people who are in trauma to come and go to the courts. However, I do believe that we're going to have to do a better job in helping people to go to the courts, and not only have the courts of the media, because the courts of the media is a dangerous thing, because how other people have been played, especially even African Americans. You know, we're the angry black male, we're this, we're that, or everything else. When you want to go after somebody, you bring up sex, you bring up money, and you can go for them. And it's very hard to defend. So I think in order to help the voices to become stronger, those who are in, or it's not even a pro-feminist or pro-safety kind of issue, have to encourage people, whether it's being a male who's being harmed or a woman being harmed, or whatever somebody's gender is being harmed. They have to learn how and have to have the support to speak up as we move forward in the 21st century. The idea in the 20th century that we could just be quiet and then come out 10 years from now, 15 years from now, is not going to continue to hold water, because too many people have been burnt by that. There are some legitimate cases with that, but there's also those who have not. And in order to make that a stronger case, the connection has to be closer. And those in the advocacy world have to work to help people. And that is not an easy thing to work on. I've worked in the area of domestic violence. I've worked in a lot of other issues in families, and how to bring people who have felt marginalized and abused and devalued by powerful men and powerful women. I've had a lot of people in my career as a social worker and an educator. I've had more women supervisors than I've had male supervisors. And so the pats on the back, good jobs, I'm like, I could take them there. But, you know, it's a lot of things that we have to deal with, too. But it's historically more women. And so, therefore, we have to learn how to utilize our HRs, how to utilize our legal teams in a much stronger fashion than to come out 5 to 10 years down the road to do that. And when they come out, whoever comes out to bring these charges must make sure that they are not politically paid in some form or fashion to be connected to the Republicans or connected to the mayor of New York or anybody else who has political aspirations to try to knock off Cuomo. They have to be, the more they are tied to that, the more it discredits their argument. And so those are the things that we have to look at. So Cuomo's in an interesting thing that he should be tried in court and then have to deal with this as a governor, because he has to run for next year. So this is going to be interesting as it comes up.
And that's a great point, because, you know, it's noteworthy that when this started to take on new life, mostly progressive legislators in the New York State Assembly were the ones calling for his resignation. But as this started to go up, you see Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, now calling, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who represents New York's 14th District, now calling, Senator Gillibrand, who, remember, made her candidacy the Me Too candidacy when she was running. She's also called. But, you know, in light of the issues raised by Dr. Davis, because I am thinking about, in terms of in a historical sense, you know, the Red Scare in the 1950s. If someone were to say that, you know, you're a communist on your job, you didn't really, there was not much you could do. And all of a sudden, you know, you had Hollywood actors being laid off. You had all kinds of things going on. But I do think that Biden did provide a good framework. And because remember, someone came out and made allegations about him last year when Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race. And we started to transition to that general election season. And I think what he did was he called and said, look, let's have the investigation. I'm inviting for me to be analyzed and scrutinized. I think that, you know, serves as a good approach. But I'm wondering, in your views, Professor Cook and Mr. McCall, you know, being subject to lawsuits, is that sufficient, or should, you know, representatives like Cuomo step down? Is that an effective method that we're in light of the? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Again, what I would say is the you know, the progressive in me is like, okay, we have women here. I mean, when you have smoke, most of the times there's fire. And when you have a powerful man here, and it looks as if he was abusing his authority and his power to have some type of way with women. So the progressive be is like, all right, resign, get him out of there. Let's get someone else in there. New, bold, progressive leadership. But as an attorney, and as a criminal defense attorney as well, I know most times everything is not as cut as dry as it may seem. And what I always advocate for is for someone to have their day in court, or in this case here, at least to have a full-blown investigation to the underlying charges or to the underlying allegations, and understand the nature of which happened, what has happened. And if he clearly was out of line, he should resign or he should be impeached. Simple as that. But again, I think what I would say, again, as a progressive, I understand the enormity of the allegations. But two, I think it should be a framework for, regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat. First things first, those women should be the right to be heard. They should not be denied any right to be heard. They should be, when they come out initially, they should be their allegations of what happened should be believed to be true. And I think after that investigation, I think however it turns out, I think that should give although it's not going to change the public opinion too much, because it pretty much like Cuomo is getting tried in the media at this point. But I honestly believe an independent investigation, which I think, again, I'm in South Carolina, but to my understanding, I think he's definitely called for an independent investigation to be held on for these allegations. So I'm in favor of waiting until the investigation is over to make a decision on whether or not he should just resign or be impeached. But I think that should be a standard that we hold all politicians to, regardless of your political affiliations, regardless of how powerful you are. I think the women should definitely be heard and should be believed and given their opportunity without being chastised and without being scrutinized for the length of time that it takes. I don't care if it was 30 years ago. All right, if you felt as if you were violated, or someone used their heightened position to influence you in a sexual manner or some type of sexual harassment, you should be heard. And again, but where I'm drawing the line is, I think there should be an investigation before it happens. And I think he's called for an investigation. And I think I mean, if the investigation is over with next week, I think we're going to have the same results anyway. If it's over with next month, we're going to have the same results. So again, I think having that investigation is a good piece for us. So we're not getting stuck in a pickle where we're saying, all right, well, the Republicans did it. Now, okay, we call for the Republicans to be resign as soon as the allegations came out. And then now you have a Democrat on the same sense. You have some Democrats being timid. But again, the progressive in me, I'm like, get them out. But again, the lawyer in me, I do understand the enormity of the task and how well and how needed an investigation is needed in this situation. But not just for Governor Cuomo, but for anyone who's been accused of sexual harassment or any type of harassment allegations of that nature. But yeah.
And lastly, Professor Cook, what to Mr. McQuez's, Mr. McCall's point, in that you have this both sidesism. What do you say about Republicans who say, well, look at what you did to Kavanaugh, right? Look at how you tried to derail Brett Kavanaugh's chances to be on the Supreme Court. And also, if you could touch on, the fact that the Siena poll showed that 57% still say they're satisfied with the way Cuomo is handling the allegations. Is Cuomo's political future over, in your view?
Oh, I think I think the likelihood of him being elected to a fourth term as governor is small. I think that he was never really a very popular guy. He was an effective guy in the context of New York politics, but he was really not a very well-liked guy. People feared him as opposed to liked him. because he's a bare knuckle kind of politician, an old school politician, and that's okay if that's what people want. I mean, it doesn't float my boat, but that's what people in New York seem to want. They elected him, given the choice they had on the other side. So I think that this is probably going to be the end of his reign as governor, whether he's impeached or simply finishes out his term. Impeachment, as we all know, is a political process. It's not a legal process. There are no beyond reasonable doubt standards. It's what the will of the political body conducting the impeachment thinks is worthy of being impeached and convicted. And that may happen to him because the politics in New York are shifting against him among the politicians. Now, as I said about the federal impeachment, the jurors, the politicians, the elected officials in the legislature have to pay attention to their constituents, because if you impeach a guy that your constituents don't want to be impeached, then maybe they don't elect you next time around. So you have to sort of listen to them that way. But the political dynamic among the legislators, I think, is saying we can't afford to be seen as being complicit in this behavior that he's been accused of. Now, as Mr. McCall says, there will be some sort of investigation. How good, bad, or indifferent it is remains to be seen. But that investigation will have to have some credible facts that support either impeachment and removal or exoneration. And if it supports either one, that's the way I think the politicians in the legislature are going to go. It remains to be seen if there are civil or criminal liabilities for him, which are a different deal. But that will, in large part, depend on what the investigation conducted by the legislature says. But I think he's been damaged pretty badly in terms of a political future in New York State. And I don't know enough about the facts factually to say, yeah, he deserves that. But that, I think that's the way it's likely to play out based on what's been reported publicly so far, at least.
Can I say one more thing real quick? I think COVID-19 has been an interesting blessing for politicians, because now we are having to learn how to be political without touching people, how to be political and stand 6 feet away from people, 5 feet away from people. That's important, because that old style politics, we hugged you, we touched you, we did all that stuff, we embraced you, we held the babies, we did all these other kind of things. That can be perceived interesting. One of the ladies said, he held me too long, okay? In this COVID-19 world, we bump, wave, do all that, and learning how to campaign in a way where we don't even have touch, while it may be frustrating, is probably very good, because I helped to pass a sexual harassment bill while I was on the city council, and I had to make sure that everybody, including the politicians, were able to take training, because we don't have to. When you're in elected office and you've been in elected office for so long, that things that you may have done when you first got into office 20 years ago that was acceptable, now is not acceptable. And so we are in a world that we don't touch. And that is probably good for everybody as we learn how to come back. And even when the masks are taken off and everything else, some of that we should not go back to.
I just want to thank Dr. Fred Cook, Olivia Drepsick, Chiquez McCall, Dr. Davis, and Devin Keith for such a fantastic conversation. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. Thank you for making episode 35 such a dynamic one. I want to go ahead and sign off and conclude the 35th episode. Again, I want to extend my gratitude and appreciation and how honored I was to have such an amazing panel this evening. So thank you so much. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the 35th broadcast of The Political Mic.